Hey boys and girls, Ken Smith Fishing. So I originally named this high school tournament fishing, but I realized this goes across a lot of different spectrums, from middle school fishing, high school fishing, college fishing, even adults who are just starting to tournament fish. And I have been privileged to tournament fish now. Gosh, I fished my first tournament, a Mr. Bass of Arkansas tournament, when I was 15 years old. I'm 59 years old, so that's something like 44 years. That's some University of Arkansas math right there. But I've been tournament fishing a really long time. And what kind of got me thinking about this tournament was observing co-anglers who tournament fish, but more so, I've had the opportunity now on a couple of occasions to captain originally some college anglers fishing, and more so now some high school anglers fishing. And although I have seen both who are extremely talented fishermen, fisher boys and girls, I've also seen some that I think, gosh, why are they doing that? And what made them think that would work? And it really got me thinking about kind of what I have learned now over 44 years of tournament bass fishing. Now, to level set, just because I fished tournaments for 44 years doesn't mean I'm good at it. But I think I've proven that I am pretty good at it. I've got, and the only statistics I really have, besides you guys see my backdrop there at the lake with all my trophies and plaques behind me, and I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm trying to kind of validate my stance here. I've had an Angler of the Year in the BFLs, in the Texas division, the Cowboy division, which is hard to win. I think most every year I've fished all of the tournaments in the Cowboy division. I've finished in the top 10, certainly, if not the top 20, I think I fished in the top 10. I've had a couple of wins. I finish in the top 10 about every 5 or 6 tournaments I fish. And then I've got a couple of different Angler of the Year titles in team fishing, both with my buddy Dickie and also with my old buddy Bill Johnson. So I have been around a long time, but I've also had a fair amount of success and a fair amount of wins and a fair amount of real high places. So I thought I would share with you kind of my take on tournament fishing and the lessons I have learned. And a lot of these lessons I have learned because I've been fortunate enough to fish with some really, really good fishermen. And I pay attention. That's probably one of my best traits, is I kind of pay attention to what's going on. So like a college or high school, probably more college, I called it Tournament Fishing 1001. And I thought I would break it down for you, what I see as mistakes, and then kind of what I see as what is really important in tournament fishing. And the first thing I'll talk to you about that's a lesson that I saw. So I several years ago, I was a captain, and by captain, I mean I showed up, 2 boys I did not know got in my boat, and they said, we want to go here. And in hindsight, we probably didn't do it properly because we went to where they wanted to fish. They had not had any opportunity to practice. They caught nothing where they wanted to fish, and they were really at a loss as to where to go. So I carried them into an area where I had fished recently, and they caught some fish. But what was interesting was it was a late February tournament. It was cold. The water was in the low 50s, 51, 52 degrees. And it was really interesting. The 2 boys were both college anglers. One was obviously a talented angler, and one didn't really have much of a clue. And I'm glad this is several years later, so they can't figure out who I was talking about here. But one of them in 52 degree water started throwing a frog over the top of about a 15-foot deep drain. And I couldn't help myself because my sister was a school teacher. My mom worked in the school district, so I got a little school teacher in me. And I said to the boy, I said, why are you throwing a frog? It's 52 degrees out there. And his response was, in so many words, he had just watched Dean Rojas catch him on TV on a frog. So what I'm going to say to you is the first thing not to pay attention to is how they're catching them on TV. Dean Rojas, if I remember right, because he and I talked about it, was in Florida, that it was about, as a matter of fact, it might even been the year prior, but he had seen something on TV and he was going to take that and apply it to where he was going, no matter if it was the right condition or not. And it was absolutely not the right condition. And by the way, his buddy was throwing a trap and caught all the fish throwing that trap, and he knew how to throw a trap. So first thing, undue influences do not pay attention to, is how they're catching them on TV. Second one is how they're catching them on YouTube. And I want to give myself a pass here, because when I tournament fish, when I show videos on here, I'll even talk about the old Honey Hole TV show with Jerry Dean, and then with Bill Wilcox subsequently. It's very timely. We post what we've been doing. Now, we've talked about this on my channel before. I'm a 6 cents homer, but if they're biting on a straight cream crankbait, they're biting on a Lucky Craft crankbait, I'm going to throw what they're biting on. That was part of my agreement with 6 cents. You see me throw 6 cents a lot. You see me throw Cincos a lot. You see me throw a lot of different baits a lot. I am not a one bait homer, because I'm a tournament fisherman. I'm going to throw whatever they're biting on. But in general, most YouTube guys, it's not fair to say, but there's some truth in this, are either on private ponds, or they filmed a month ago or 2 months ago or 3 months ago or last year, and they're posting videos. Just be careful what that input you're getting, when it is, why they're throwing the baits they're throwing, if it's a sponsor bait only, things like that. So I would say to you, don't pay a lot of attention to how they're catching them on TV. Now, it's different now to some degree. If you're going to Fork, or if you're going to Palestine this next weekend, and you just watch the Bass Pro Tour guys on Palestine, that's really applicable, right? They just did it. Just pay attention to what you're watching versus when you're actually fishing. And then the last thing, and I actually chuckled about this when I wrote this down, tournament reports. I was thinking back, so I can't lie, right? I can't tell you I caught them on a wing ding when you're going to see my video the next week. And by the way, this is one of the hardest things about practice for me, right? I'll have guys that say, hey, are you catching them on the water? And I have to answer, and I've always done it to some degree, but I have to be honest now, because otherwise they're going to call me later and go, dude, you lied to me. I watched your video. You weren't catching them, or you were catching them. But of all the guys, it's a bunch of guys that I've known over the years that have won tournaments and then subsequently stated how they won those tournaments in print, or when they get up on stage with Chad at the Bass Champs or whatever. I'm going to estimate that less than 10% of them tell the truth. And that's straight up from me watching them do it, and from me having personal knowledge of talking to them about how they caught their fish. Guys just aren't going to do it. They don't want to tell you how they're catching them. They don't want to compete with you. They'll tell you it's a sponsor bait. It may not be a sponsor bait. They'll tell you they're throwing a Carolina rig and they're throwing a rattle trap. They'll tell you they're throwing a top water and they're throwing a Cloud 20. So first off, those three things, don't pay a whole heck of a lot of attention to them. Now, there are some factors that do matter, and I try to kind of break them down in big general sense. And to me, they are number one, season of the year you're fishing, recent weather, upcoming weather, extremely important, and fishing pressure. And I thought we would explore each of those, but we would explore each of those as they apply to the specific seasons. Now, most guys would break down seasons kind of spring, summer, fall, winter. But for me, you really got to break spring down into three different parts. You got spring pre-spawn, you got spring spawn, and you got spring post-spawn. And those are extremely distinct. To me, they are as distinct as winter is to summer. So I'm going to do, I guess, basically 6 videos here. We're going to talk about spring pre-spawn, spring spawn, spring post-spawn, summer, fall, and winter. And we'll do those first 3 right here pretty much in succession, because they're going to be applicable to what's going on right now in our tournament fishing. So first, let's talk about spring pre-spawn. So to me, that is water temp in my part of the world, let's call it Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, 50 to 60 degrees. And I say moon not in full, so not a full moon. And you got to pay attention to that, because I have seen, matter of fact, we just saw at Texoma this past weekend, I think of the top 5 finishers in the Toyota Series, 4 of them were fishing nest fish. The spawn's not in full swing, but the fishing's crappy, so those guys were the most competitive. And it was just off of a full moon. And it was, the water was only in that, what I would call typically pre-spawn space, that 50 to probably high 50s to very low 60 degrees. So you got to pay attention in the latter part of, in our part of the world, February, even March, or even April, if you get a little warming trend and you get a full moon, you're going to jump a little bit into that spawning season, and we'll talk about that on the next video. To me, that pre-spawn is when fish are still actively feeding. The females have not committed to the spawn, which in general, I think they kind of quit biting a little bit when they start thinking about fooling around. And then it's when fish are transitioning from kind of their winter haunts, starting to get in areas around spawning flats, or around areas that they're going to spawn, not necessarily even spawning flats. So that's the pre-spawn season to me. And I broke it down from there into kind of 3 different types of lakes, and we could break this down a lot further, but I was trying to keep it real general. The first one is grass lakes, followed by, well, and I'm gonna do it backwards but kind of timbered lakes, followed by kind of boathouse lakes. So lakes that don't have a Conroe, Cedar Creek, Livingston, lakes that don't have a lot of other structure, so you have to kind of fish the boathouses. So let's first talk about grass lakes a little bit. So in the grass lake space, that pre-spawn time of year, you really generally want to be fishing outside the edge of the grass. And I don't care if that's 3 feet of water or 23 feet of water. That's generally where I think I want to fish. On warm, sunny days, and we'll talk about more about this in a minute, when that water is starting to warm up throughout the day, I also want to spend some time on top of that grass. Now, I generally don't go to the inside edge, but if I've got 3 feet or more of water on top of the grass, I want to start thinking about fishing a bait over the top of that grass. And I want to pay particular attention to grass areas, either main lake points or secondary points, and generally speaking, that being the very first point going into a creek or a cove. That first point off the main lake is the first place I'm going to look for those fish. Now on boathouse lakes, I'm going to fish the same kind of areas, main lake points and secondary points, but first secondary points going into those caves. But I'm going to mostly focus on the outside edge of that boathouse. I'm not going to fish the back of the boathouse, and I'm certainly not going to fish the walkways just yet. And then on wooded lakes, I'm going to fish the same areas. My primary focus, if I can find it, is horizontal timber. Anything laying down, anything with horizontal limbs coming off of trees. If you can find old cedar trees, those are ideal. If you can't find those, if it's an older lake, if it's a lake fork where there's not a lot of horizontal timber, if it's a Richwood Chambers, I'm going to find pole timber, but I'm going to try to be doing that particularly with my forward imaging. I'm going to be looking for those fish like you saw those guys doing at Fork this spring. They're going to be basically out there hunting those fish with that forward imaging and trying to catch them off that pole timber, because it's the easiest place to see them, and generally speaking, it's the easiest place to catch them as well. Now, from there, I just stuck this in here as a caveat that I wanted to remind myself to talk to y'all about this. So when I say adjacent to spawning areas, in generally speaking, bass want to spawn on a relatively hard bottom. And what I said here was the way to check that, and I can't tell you how key this is when you go into an area. It's not the best way to do it, but take your rod tip or take a stick or take a paddle or take your push pole and push into the bottom. And if you can push that push pole 3, 4, 5 inches into the bottom, you're in the wrong area. Those are super silty bottoms. They may be full of leaves. They may be full of something else. Those fish don't want to spawn on them. I'm going to call them mucky bottoms, right? Those fish want to spawn on sandy bottoms, ideally. They love pea gravel bottoms, little bitty pea gravel. So think marble and smaller. If you got a rocky lake, when I think of rocky lakes, I always think of Fort Gibson in Oklahoma. It's got a lot of real shelfy rock out into the water. That's ideal to catch those spawning fish off that shelfy rock. And then even like on Rayburn, when you get into areas where there's not a lot of sandy bottom, they will spawn on that hard clay, but they really like it if you got a little sand or a little gravel mixed into that. So if you can find one of those areas or shell bed, those are golden. Those are things you want to fish this year. And even if they're not there, you want to put them in your memory bank and you want to go back to them in future years, because eventually the water is going to be riding those areas and you're going to whack them off that stuff. So spawning areas, that's generally what I mean. Now, so one of the things I talked about there was recent weather, and specifically what you want to pay attention to here is the water cooling off or is the water warming up? And the fish are going to react very differently whether it's cooling off or warming up. You want to pay attention to wind direction. Has the wind recently fishing into an area? I got a great description of this. I was catching the fool out of fish in the in an Indian Creek at Rayburn one year. And 2 days prior to the tournament, the wind blew out of the south. That would have been out of the southwest, and it was rolling 3 and 4 footers into that area. And there ain't no other way to describe it. It trashed that area, and those fish pulled back out of there. They did not bite. Now, that's different than had it been a 3 to 5 or 10 mile an hour wind that would have, same direction, just been rolling plankton in there and might have pushed those shad in there to feed. So you got to think in your practice, what's going on, even though I'm not on the water, even though I can't go practice it because of the wind, what's that recent weather doing to my area I'm going to fish? And then the last part of that is, sometimes there might be an area, say a creek goes in and corners and you've got a protected area in the back, but and Indian might be a great example of this, or different parts of Harvey or different parts of Beach. If the wind's been blowing so hard the last 3 or 4 days that nobody could get there to fish, but it might not have trashed that area, that's something you want to be thinking about. There's been no pressure on that area. You can go in there and probably have virgin fish that have not been beat on for the last 3 or 4 days, versus an area with that same wind where everybody could get to and they've been hammering those fish. You want to think about that. Have people been beating on them because of the weather and the wind conditions, or have they not been able to get to them and the water didn't get trashed because of the wind direction or the wind velocity? Upcoming weather. This is the one that probably has gotten all of us at some point or another. And again, we talk mainly of warming and cooling. So if the water has been warmer than when you practice, or if the water's warming while you practice, you got to be thinking about where are those fish trying to move up to. If it's cooling and you caught them in the bushes, where are they going to back off to? Is there a line of timber out there in 3 or 5 feet of water they're going to back out to? Is there some nice shallow brush piles you can back out there and fish that they're going to back out to? And by the way, it's okay, and it's actually really good to be thinking, okay, today was high bluebird skies and those fish got tight to that cover and I went in there and flipped on them, but I know tomorrow they may not be in that same area. Don't spin out because you make a pass through there flipping and they don't bite. If they've repositioned, you need to be thinking about what's plan B, what's plan C, what's plan D, where are those fish going to go to when or if they disappear on me. And then the last note I'll say here with that upcoming weather is, will you be able to get to it and fish it? And again, back to a great example of, I was on a huge group of fish one year in the mouth of the Indian Mounts at Toledo Bend, and I knew so the wind had blown out of the west, mostly in practice, and I knew there was a big east wind forecast for the tournament, and I was so hard-headed I just thought there was some way I'd be able to get over there and catch those fish. And when I got over there, it was rolling 3 or 4 footers, and there was simply no way to do it. And that was foolish on my part to waste my practice time in an area when I saw the forecast and I knew there was no way I was going to be able to go back in there and catch those fish. I don't care what today's conditions are if tomorrow is the tournament. You've got to go and practice looking for fish that you can catch tomorrow, because nobody cares who wins practice. I have won practice a whole bunch of times, and nobody has yet given me a check or given me a trophy for winning practice. And then the last thing is pressure. And all I can say to you here is it's best, if at all possible, to fish away from the pressure. And I know that's hard to do, and we've talked about this before. There are reasons on Sam Rayburn that fish get caught in beach, that fish get caught in the Black Forest, in mud, in Harvey, in the deer stand, in Pofers, in the canyons. It's because those are areas that just hold a whole hell of a lot of fish. And if you can find something somewhere else, the year Jim Tutt won the Toyota Series, whatever it was called back in the day, and those pockets below Jackson Hill, he kind of had those to himself. There was a little bit of grass in there, and he kind of fished away from everybody else. And although now, yeah, we all fish in there. Back in the day, not nearly as many people fished in there, and he went in there and he kind of had them to himself, and he won that tournament. So if you can fish away, if you can't, if you know you're going into the deer stand, if you know you're going into 6 Mile at Toledo, if you know you're going into Soldier Creek at Texoma, you dang better have a mindset when you get over there to know you're fishing in a crowd. If you've never watched those guys fish the Potomac up in D.C., when those guys go fishing, they know they're going to be fishing in a crowd. They know they're literally going to be bumping boats. You got to get in that mindset to say, I'm okay with that. I'm going to outfish those guys around me. I'm going to get finessey. I'm going to get aggressive. I'm going to do whatever you got to do. But just be prepared when you go in there. And something comes to mind, and I'm not going to talk about it, but, well, I will talk about it. So a guy at Texoma this past week was on a good group of fish. A buddy of mine fished with him. He was on a part of Texoma, and there was a big high school tournament. If y'all don't know the story, they had to cancel Thursday and Friday of the Toyota Series at Texoma. So they went out on Saturday. They had a 300 boat high school tournament on Saturday. When he got into his area, there were already 10 or 15 kids in there fishing the high school tournament. He caught 2, and he spun out because there was 2 young girls in there who had caught 3 4s and a 2. And he thought that they were done, and he left that area, and he never got another bite. And he should have stayed in that area, because he should have realized on Texoma, on a windy day, with 300 high schoolers and 100 plus Toyota Series folks, it's going to get crowded in the few areas everybody can fish. And it cost him. All right, so let's talk a little bit about pre-spawn. So if it's warming, and what I'm going to say here is, you find less pressured water or the fish are being aggressive, generally speaking, I'm going to try to cover all the water I can. I'm going to throw moving baits, I'm going to throw square bills, I'm going to throw spinner baits, I'm going to throw chatter baits. If it's really, really late in the pre-spawn and those fish are starting to move up and think about spawning, I love throwing a frog, I love throwing a buzzbait, I love throwing a whopper plopper. Those fish will absolutely feed up, especially those big females when they get shallow, because we've talked about this before. When a fish attacks a bait down in the water column, that bait can go left or right, and if you come up from side anyway, he's got all kind of different directions he's go. If that bait is pinned to the surface, it can only go left or right. If a fish comes up after it, if it goes down, he's ate. If he goes up, he's going to get eaten. He can only go left or right. And it's just pre-programmed into those fish that a bait on top of the water is a really easy to catch meal. So if I can, late pre-spawn, I'm going to throw a topwater. And then my fallbacks are always a weightless Cinco, a wacky worm, or a really light Carolina rig. And then probably what we've seen and what we've learned as much as anything else over the last 2 years, 3 years with forward imaging is that jerkbait is just flat one of the most versatile, because you can catch aggressive fish on it, but you can also trigger fish that aren't aggressive with the erratic action of a jerkbait. So we have seen that over and over the last couple of years. Jerkbait is just a really, really effective bait. And then when you get those pre-spawn cold and the days where it's cooling, or those highly pressured areas, when I say highly pressured, I'm talking fishing pressure, then you got to make them react. And that goes either a jerk bait, if you're in a grass lake, a rattle bait, an A-rig, smoking a crankbait, smoking a spinner bait. And if you've got heavy enough cover, and I always think of those guys fishing those bulrushes in Florida, you can flip on them. If they're in there, you can flip on them. And you know, I've talked about this. I've had many co-anglers say to me when I'm flipping bushes, man, why are you flipping a 3/4 ounce weight? It's only 3 or 4 or 5 feet deep. I don't want them to look at it. I want them to react to it. It falls by them. I don't want that. I want that bait to go, and I want them to have to react to that bait. So flipping works for me if there's enough water in cover on those highly pressured days. And then the second thing is, if you can't get them to react to it, you just got to put it in their face. You got to put a bait down there and drag it right in front of them. And to me, that's a Carolina rig, a wacky rig, a dead sticking, a bunch of other finesse type styles, drop shots, things like that. Certainly shaky head as well. So those are my thoughts right now on pre-spawn. We'll come back probably next week or the week after, and we'll talk about spawning fish, and which is right where most of us are right now. So stick around. We'll have, I guess, course 1002. We'll talk about spawning fish. So hope you guys stick around. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks, guys.